With the advent of 2021 and the thankful end to 2020, we're now in, well, a new decade, a new year, a new opportunity to grow and develop. Whether that means that you're going out and finding a new job, a new career path, or you finally get that new digs, the new setup, the new house. Or if you're like us car guys, you get another car, you get a new project. Well, whatever those other things mean for you, for us car guys, it means that we gotta go shopping. We gotta look at the market, we gotta see what's available. But why is it that some cars are worth so much when they're so old? Today, we're gonna look at the GTR, specifically the R32, and figure out, well, should it be worth $100,000 in the next 5 to 10 years? To give a bit of backstory, my brother and I were talking about project cars because he himself wants to get his own and not just modify his daily Lancer. That said, he is very much dead set on getting his hands on an R32 or R33 model. And that led to the conversation of why is it that they're so expensive when they are as old as they are? And that, my friends, led to a nice little discussion on the economics of supply and demand. We're not going to get into all of the nitty-gritty aspects of supply and demand, but we will touch on a few key components as we move forward. But enough about that. Let's get some backstory on the R32. As many of you who would be watching this probably already know, the R32 Skyline is one of the most desirous cars in all of JDM culture. It was released after the very much failed R31 and came to instant success. Became literally a classic overnight and had incredibly good success both on and off the track. It was a car that anyone, anywhere around the world was aware of because of how successful it really was. After all, we now know the brand name of Calisonic as a result of it. With the original price of these cars being around $31,000 to $35,000 depending on your trim option, they were pretty much very well placed in the market as a competitive sports car. It came in not just one, but actually 4 different trim options: the GTR, the GTST, GTS, and GTS4. Now, with this incredible success led to a larger volume of sales, which in turn gave us a very large pool to pull from later on. This is a very important detail. Put a pin in it, we'll come back to it. After its incredibly good success starting in '89 and going to '94, Nissan needed another GTR. After all, they can't just bake all of their sales into this one car pie. They need to keep making pies. And so the R33 was born. Now, the R33 was not as successful as the R32. In fact, the R32's fame and call was so great that it basically overshadowed the model as a whole. There were obviously very happy and very excited people around the R33, but the heritage that the R32 carried was just that great. And as we got into the R34, the final generation before the rest of the world would finally get a GTR model, the R34 just blew the doors off of any expectation. Except for on track, it didn't do well on track. But it did incredibly good in the streets and in the eyes and hearts of people, therefore becoming another instant classic, overshadowing the R33. It really gets dunked on pretty hard. It's kind of sad, actually. Now, with the incredible success of the R34, again, in the eyes of the people, this was a car that became the pinnacle of this is what a powerful Japanese car should look like. And it was known as one of the icons of JDM culture, right alongside the Supra, the RX-7, and NSX. Now, all the while, they had ended production of the R32, and now we have a finite set of parameters, a set number of the amount of cars that would be available. Now, here's the key thing here, okay? America never got the GTR. The first GTR we got was in the latter part of the noughties with the R35. And at that point, it was no longer called the Skyline. Instead, this weird G35 Infinity thing was. Because of this massive gap in time between when the R34 was released and the R35 was even created, there was a lot of time for us car enthusiasts to stew. And we played video games. We watched movies. We watched Initial D and other anime. We got so involved emotionally into the R32. And that was because of the 25-year rule. So here in America, we can't import cars from other countries, not just Japan, until they have reached 25 years old. They have to have that moniker. There's a couple other stipulations involved, but that is the keynote one. If it's not met, the car could be faced with being crushed or held at customs or even sent back. Because of this, people were getting excited about the R32. After all, it was first created and made in 1989, which means 2014 was going to be a big year. And oh boy, was it. See, as time moved on, the R32's value actually was decreasing. Depreciation happens to all cars, no matter the model. Whether it's a Civic or a Mercedes, it's going to lose value as soon as it leaves the lot. And of course, the more wear and tear you put on it, mileage, mods, etc., these types of things bring down the value of the unit even further. Which means that this $31,000 to $35,000 car is now somewhere around 10 grand in American money come the early thousands. But keen people here in America were buying out units in Japan and just paying for storage until they could get them exported, which is currently what's going on with the R34. We'll talk about that a little bit later. As 2014 arrived, suddenly there were all these R32s available to be exported to America from Japan, and they were selling around $40,000. They weren't cheap. Now, of course, there are other people with other examples where they're able to get their model for 25 and stuff like that. But this is a significant jump in cost from 10 grand to 40 grand by like the entire value of the car's original sales price. Let's just say that sometimes perceived value outweighs actual, and that's a key thing to remember with supply and demand. As we just stated, the finite numbers of the amount of cars left in Japan is dwindling from a number of reasons, whether it be us buying them and exporting them obviously, or from being crashed, wrecked, pulled apart to fix other cars. There's a number of reasons why that number could go down. And as a result of these available units decreasing, people's attention were brought to it. If you know anything about relationships, forbidden fruit is always the most desired, and as a result, people went nuts when they finally could get their hands on it. Now, this in turn created something known as a saturation on the market. Suddenly there were a whole lot more GTRs on the streets of America than there had ever been at any point in time, even before the introduction of this 25-year law. As a result, we were seeing GTRs for sale from private owners who had already exported them over, and that further started to hit the value of this car. See, there was this massive artificial inflation, and then it started to decrease in value as a lot more models became prevalent and available. Also, we here in the West started becoming aware of things like the other submodels of the Skyline GTR, such as the GTST. Because of this opportunity, there now became price gaps between the different models and, of course, the different colors. With these gaps in place, it further influences the cost and value of the car, which means that now you could have a GTR go for sale for around $35,000, maybe even higher if it's a V-Spec. You could spend maybe half of that for a GTST, and all the components that make that thing rear-wheel drive are actually really easy to get parts for because, well, a lot of parts were shared on the R32 between it, the Maxima of its generation, and the S chassis. As a result of this education of the West, it further drove the value of the GTR down a little bit because, well, the accessibility to the BN chassis, the Skyline, was becoming much easier to get into. No longer were people being priced out as heavily. So how does this play into its future? Well, right now, GTRs are selling for around $40,000 to $50,000 if you're, again, getting the higher trim options. So how do we get from where we're at now to some people speculating $100,000 for the same model in 5 years. That's where supply and demand comes in. See, supply and demand is what influences the price and value of an object on the market. The more of that object there is, the less valuable it is perceived to be because, well, there's a lot of it. But if the demand for that item equals or surpasses the amount of units available, it can raise the value of the item. And that's what happened when it came to America. The demand was incredibly high. People wanted them because, again, for some people, it was their poster car. Much like kids from the 80s had Diablos, kids of my generation had GTRs. Because of this insanely high demand for these cars, it influenced the market to make them be more valuable. But as they became more and more available, the demand decreased, but at a faster rate than the supply was decreasing. Now we're facing a new crisis. We're running out of cars in Japan. There was an article made, I want to say about a year ago, on Jalopnik where it says Japan wants us to stop buying their GTRs because they're now running out of their own cars. And it just is a proof of something that happens here in America all the time, in the classic car market, in the Porsche market, and definitely in the USDM, Evo, and Eclipse market. They're running out of cars, whether it be because people are crashing them or modifying them out the wazoo and therefore becoming more of a stagnant object on the market. There's not as many fluid assets able to be moved around, and thus it stagnates their value and then turns around and starts upping their value because now there are less clean and pristine examples to be sold, thus making those examples exponentially more valuable than the ones that are already tore apart or repaired or, God forbid, salvaged. And that is why in the coming years it will not be as big a stretch to see cars like the GTR worth exponentially more money than it already costs. It's a dwindling asset. There's less and less of these available, thus making them more valuable. After all, there'll come a day where all the cars we drive will either be historical monuments somewhere or kept in some rich guy's garage well after we're dead. It's hard to think that cars that we love to drive and build right now will someday end up being a poster car as an antique versus something that's current. It's hard to believe, especially for me as an Evo guy, knowing that my car is now becoming of age of 18 years old. Soon, people will be importing the JDM variant of what I drive right now in just 7 years. I could have kids that are old enough to understand what the car is in that amount of time. It's kind of hard to believe, but this is the crossroads we are at, which is why so many have called this the pinnacle of car culture. We're at the crossroads of new modern innovations that will outdate everything that we love right now. It's kind of hard to believe. What will happen to the GTR in the future? Do you think, like I do, that it could soon become a $100,000 car? Or do you think the advent of the R34 will cause it to stagnate and peter down a bit as people want to get that model? I would love to know your thoughts. Let me know down in that comment section down below. After all, this is a discussion, not just me ranting and having some form of financial education on this show. We do a lot of this type of content actually, so if you're new around here, stick around because there's going to be a lot more that comes in the coming days. And with all that said, God bless you all, and we'll see you on another episode. Peace!